Picture the pastures of Ireland. There, cattle outnumber people and animals account for over 37% of CO2 emissions, something that needs to come down if the country wants to meet its climate goals. But many farmers say that meeting targets could drive them into bankruptcy, with the head of the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, Pat McCormack, warning that farmers could have to cull their livestock.
No less than the future of Irish farming is on the line, according to those taking part in today's rallies organised by the Irish Farmers Association. Among the worries, the move towards cutting emissions by 51%.
There's talk of a cull of the cattle herd.
If you look right around the world, there seems to be a concerted effort by all governments, whatever agenda they are following, and some of this seems to have started in America, to be quite frank about it, of basically getting rid of livestock, cattle, especially cows, in the name of climate. And in my opinion, we are going down a dangerous road. There's people talking about food being made in labs and all of this. None of this is proven. None of this is, to be quite frank about it, is sustainable or doable in the bulk that you need to feed the world.
Well, the reality is the number of cows are increasing. That's the reality. No cows are being culled. The number of cattle are increasing in the country. And we still have a continuing imbalance.
Farmers are facing fierce uncertainty, which is very bad for the simple reason, if you don't know the path that you have going forward, then it leads to a lot of indecisiveness, and it leads to farmers in a situation that they don't know whether they're coming or going.
We do have an issue with government using CPO, using compulsory purchase order, using land grab to take working farmland for that. That is our main issue. We've provided plenty of alternatives that don't require that, but we're being ignored. They won't listen to us.
I think that we are going down a road of leaving people in more dire need of food.
There's 8 million cattle in Ireland, and the numbers have been rising over the last decade and a half at least. And we need to have a measure in place through the proper husbandry of cattle to make sure that the growth is stopped and that we at least have a control on the amount of cattle and the methane they produce before we can start tackling the environmental problem and the climate problem that's created through that.
The government and the Green Party try to give the impression that livestock numbers are going up. Sometimes they say they're increasing exponentially. The reality is we reached 7 million cattle in 1973. We peaked at 7.6 million in 1998, and today cattle numbers are at 7 million or 6.9 million again today. So zero change in the 50 years.
While this debate is happening, the herd is still increasing, and it has been increasing since 2010. The complaints about the existence of culling, which doesn't exist, and the need for culling, which needs to exist to a certain extent, is kind of mute if the numbers are increasing all the time.
The cows, if you like, have become the symbol for attacking climate change, and therefore the political grab point is that, we'll cull the cows to achieve this so-called greenhouse gas reduction.
We are being harassed and insulted daily by a very small minority of people, but they're very, very vocal, and they're very dangerous people.
What angers me the most is the way we, the farmers, are being blamed for everything. We're the cause of climate change, meat is bad for you, we're destroying the water quality. It's all our faults. And this misinformation is spread by our national broadcaster, by social media, by environmentalists.
We actually have a situation that farmers are being seen as the environmental bad guys, whereas in actual fact, most of the time they've done exactly what the government has asked them to do, increase production. You will find that most of the things that caused environmental damage in Ireland actually came in some way from the government.
The Green Party is trying to create a narrative that Irish farmers have destroyed rural Ireland, that we destroyed biodiversity, so that when they implement further and further more draconic measures against us, that we'll not have the sympathy of the public. That's what they're trying to do. Global warming is caused by additional CO2 and additional methane in the atmosphere and a little bit of additional nitrous oxide. According to the IPCC, they attribute a huge amount of warming to the methane from cows.
In the future, we will look back and wonder, how did society turn on its own people so hard? And I mean turn on the people of Ireland, the rural people who are farming and producing food to feed people of the country and the people of the world.
There's a lack of balance in the whole thing, and that's the background to our group, the Irish Climate Science Forum, where we really sit down and have objectively tried to discern what really is happening to the planet, what is going on, and to make an alternative viewpoint as to a more reasonable way forward, accepting that the planet is warming, but not warming disastrously. It's now very clear, particularly, that IPCC itself is more and more a political organisation rather than an objective scientific organisation.
If the amount of methane from cows that is supposed to be causing global warming is correct, then over the last 2,000 years, the globe's ruminants should have caused the planet's temperature to rise by about 6 degrees. The globe's temperature did not rise by 6 degrees. So that just completely disproves the theory that it is causing global warming, that methane from cows is causing global warming. And over 40 million years, these ruminants have emitted billions of tons of methane and caused no global warming. So it's a bit much to suspect that they're doing it now.
The latest science, which is not recognised by IPCC, shows that methane has almost negligible greenhouse gas effect. It is crazy to be interfering with food chain supplies, particularly in a country like Ireland that is so ideally suitable for agriculture. We hope that IPCC has now elected a new leader, Mr. Jim Skee, and we hope that there will be a new approach and a real openness to accepting differing points of view on the science from outside, from independent people, and thereby to get back and become again a truly scientific, objective organisation. Net zero is a concept that somehow by 2050, by what kind of technology we don't yet know, that there would be no net emissions of CO2.
We need policies that say that whatever carbon we do produce is within confines and doesn't overproduce in a way that becomes dangerous. And this is something that we've not done for the last 200 years. We've gone in a separate direction.
Net zero, under current technology, is not achievable. It's not affordable. It's not possible because there aren't sufficient precious metals to do all the things that we're supposed to do.
The environmental effect of climate change has only occurred in this window since the Industrial Revolution because of our reliance on fossil fuels, in a way that these figures have changed to a far higher extent and a far quicker extent than any other time in human history.
It's good to have a goal, a guiding post for the future, and yes, of course, we should be as efficient, as sustainable in the broad sense that we can be, but let's be realistic. Let's do the things that make sense and that we can afford and that are good for society.
At the moment in Europe, there's a nature restoration law on every member state where they want basically peaty type land, it's boggy type land. There's a third of Ireland has that type of land, and they are trying to shut that down, which will have small farms driven out of business.
They want to re-wet as much as possible. All the commercial bog was drained, and that's what they're trying to re-wet again now.
The EU actually in the 80s gave grants to those farmers to drain that land, and now they're telling the same farmer in a full 360-degree turn, hey guy, you better put that back and re-wet it. So what that does, and what people doesn't understand, is that farmer was viable because they might have 10 extra acres that made them viable. We have communities right around Ireland that go to a local shop, a local butcher, a local store. You can say bye-bye to them. That's not good for any community. We live in a rural area. We have our way of life. We don't infringe on someone within the city because we don't know their way of life. What is going on that there's such an intent on driving people out of the rural areas?
Our main agriculture is livestock, dairying and beef. We don't grow enough of our food. We import a lot of our vegetables where we can and we should be growing here. The grain, for instance, we import is not to feed people, it's to feed the cattle. So it's a very strange system of agriculture we have.
Here in Ireland we export 90% of our beef, Why? Because we're good at what we do in producing grass-fed beef. We're not good at growing soya because we don't have the weather for it. So what you should do is make sure whoever is good and efficient at something, leave them at it. Encourage them, not discourage them like what's happening at the moment.
Our own government want to stop us from producing great food. We're the most sustainable producers in the world, and here our government wants to stop us from producing great milk and beef and import it from elsewhere like Brazil. Now our carbon footprint is very low. For us to produce 1 kilo of beef, it's only like 18 kilos of carbon, whereas if that was to come from Brazil, 1 kilo would equal to 1,000 kgs of carbon, and this is wrong. So by us importing their beef, we are helping them with the clearing of rainforests and cutting down the world's lungs for them to bring in our beef here.
If we can produce this beef here at a way less emissions, shouldn't we be producing way more of it here and a way less of it in places where it's produced under higher emissions?
We have the best food in the whole world, the highest quality, very nutritional. So why take second best? Why accept food from the likes of Brazil, unregulated, untraceable?
Agriculture is a heavily subsidised business. The income stream of any farm, whether it's large or small, depends on guaranteed payments and depends on schemes in relation to farm modernisation to an extent that doesn't exist in most other industries. If we were to apply pure capitalist principles to agriculture would never survive because it doesn't exist on a cost-benefit analysis.
The crazy thing is we don't get any grants or any support from environmental schemes or from the government at all, because they don't recognise this type of farming yet as being viable. The conventional farms would be making 10% profit without the subsidies. You know, and a lot of them actually eat into the subsidies and they're actually making a physical loss with the enterprise they're working on, and it's only the government payments that keep them alive, you know. Whereas we get no payments at all here. Our income comes from sales, direct selling, our meat, our eggs, our firewood. Certain practices can be adapted into what is conventional farming to reduce chemical input and reduce your environmental impact on soil and on the land. Agriculture that depends on subsidies or government payments it's a welfare system. It takes the farmer's focus away from producing food, from trying to farm with nature, to follow down these rabbit holes of bureaucracy, basically. And most of that time it means it's actually disconnecting even the farmer from producing a decent income because he's too busy chasing what he thinks is easy money. It's way easier and less distracting to be able to just choose where you want to go, what you want to do, find a market, and true capitalism, you know.
Essentially, the farmers did everything that they were asked to do. It's not long ago that you could put on the radio and find ads on it to tell farmers to reseed their land, so many % of their land per year. Suddenly now it's all biodiversity. So the farmer who did what was asked of him is now in trouble. So they're criticising him.
What is biodiversity anyway?
Everything, what you look at.
I mean, is it a clear term, or
It is the trees, the plants, the flora, the fauna, everything. The lot. We have 30 acres of forestry here. We have another 170 acres of forestry. The place is covered in trees and plants, and yet, according to the Green Party, we live in an area that is zero biodiversity. That's how stupid those people are.
If a farmer let rushes or scrubland, like bushes, grow out from the hedges onto his land or her land, it could get picked up by a satellite and the farmer would get fined for bad farming practices. And I know of farmers who stubbed out the bushes because they weren't going to pick up a fine, and then a year later they'd be told, well, we'll give you a grant of so many thousand if you plant these species on your land. So they would actually maybe put an acre of some sort of wildflowers or something on the land. But I never thought it was a great idea because it's in one small block. maybe in the middle of hundreds of acres. That's not the way things grow organically.
They want to create this idea that we have destroyed biodiversity in the locality, so that when they implement draconic regulations, there'll be no sympathy for it. So they're trying to create this impression that there is zero biodiversity here. And how they did that was they set up this thing called the Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity. And they had 99 randomly chosen people. Now, among those 99 randomly chosen people, there wasn't a single person that made his living from farming. And they put them into a room and fed them information. These 99 people knew nothing about biodiversity or farming. So the narrative and the information that they got was totally controlled. They were fed a certain narrative, and then they were asked to make a decision based on the narrative they were fed. So the person that controls the narrative controls the eventual decision. And the Green Party got the decision they wanted. The decision that came out was that 75% of rural Ireland has zero biodiversity. And how they came to that conclusion was they said that 65% of Ireland is intensively farmed, so that is zero biodiversity. 10% is intensive forestry, that is zero biodiversity. So this is the area where they say is zero biodiversity. So swing your camera around there. This is where there's zero biodiversity. It's full of hawks, deer, foxes, everything you could think of. And according to the Green Party, zero biodiversity.
The buzzwords that are used, which frighten people, are terms like biodiversity and ecological damage, climate catastrophe. There's a whole array of them. And it's just not fair, because even when we change the environment that we live in, we're not sterilising it. It just changes. We're given the impression that farming is sterilising the country. Farmers are well able to encourage growth of flora and fauna on their land. They should be given the power to do that and allowed to do it and encouraged to do it.
There are European Union standards in terms of nitrates and phosphates that Ireland has successfully argued a derogation from, which is the freedom to continue using large amounts of nitrates. So while we pretend that we have a more environmentally friendly system of agriculture, we really don't. The reality is that we use chemicals maybe to a different extent in a different degree than other countries, but we still use them too much. The EU is actually reducing carbon levels in Ireland. Our most recent figures is our reductions are 2%. We have international commitments on both the Paris Agreement, which is a UN agreement, and the EU's own agreement in terms of carbon emissions. That's EU policy. But Ireland is one of the 3 worst countries in the EU in following our agreements that we've already made with the EU and internationally in terms of carbon reductions.
There is an awful lot of dictatorship coming from the EU. Maybe it is now time for the farmers of Ireland, the people of Ireland, to think about leaving the EU. We can't take any more of the regulations, the red tape. We are not looking for compensation. We want to be able to farm our land.
In recent years, we see a huge push towards what's called renewable energies, which say would be wind and solar. Renewable is a word to sanitise what's actually happening, but the reality is that, say, you're taking bogland or sort of very quiet, beautiful places, really silent places, and you're building roadways, a network of roads out across them, and constructing big windmills on them.
Wind is a very bad investment. It is, number one, intermittent, unreliable, non-dispatchable is the word. It's not there when you necessarily want it. It delivers power, the nameplate power, only a fraction of the time. It's a very bad, inefficient use of land space, number one, and of materials, of machinery, compared to a conventional power plant. And, it is questionable at the end of the day how much CO2 reduction they actually achieve because of the conventional plant having to back them up all the time in a less efficient way than they would normally work.
So when the blades have exceeded their lifespan, they can't be recycled. They have to be just buried. So what's renewable about that? Okay, the wind is free, but nothing that you have put there is free.
There is no effective way of recycling these turbine blades. They are made of such a complex series of materials that there is actually no way of recycling them. They are being landfilled, believe it or not, which is disgraceful. The wind farms in Scotland necessitated cutting down 20 million trees. You know, it's so crazy, it's unbelievable and inefficient and going the wrong way, a waste of money, essentially.
Agriculture is responsible for 38% of our carbon gases, our greenhouse gases, and we passed a climate law within the last 18 months that tried to make allowances for that, and that the commitment up until the year 2030 is that agriculture will reduce by 25%.
The agriculture in Ireland will be cut?
Yeah, but far less than any other sector, far less than energy, far less than transport, far less than domestic homes. Agriculture is already getting treated specially. The problem is that agriculture has barely moved the dial at all, 1% in the last year.
I think the way it's going at the moment in Europe, they'd rather tick a box that they were the best in the world at the whole climate agenda and import most of their gear, because then they're not going to be put down for the emissions out of it. And that's a worry if that's the road we're going down.
Jessica Birch, you have a closer look at those temperatures.
I do, and worldwide we're all noticing this, even in spots where it still is currently winter. So let's dive straight into it. The past 3 days were some of the hottest ever recorded globally, according to data from the U.S. National Centers for Environmental Prediction.
The satellite temperatures, which are the only ones you can really rely on, are showing that most of the warming is in the northern hemisphere, and indeed parts of the southern hemisphere, if anything, are cooling, whereas the land-based temperatures are increasingly, it's quite obvious, influenced by what are called urban heat island effect, simply because the measuring stations are in areas that are more and more built around and therefore artificially warm.
In areas of greater urban density, temperatures are often higher than surrounding rural landscapes. This is known as the heat island effect. You may have felt this effect in areas with lots of hard surfaces, like concrete and asphalt, which absorb, trap and radiate heat.
There's one very recently about Sardinia having reached 48 degrees, a record temperature, but when they looked at the measuring point, it was buried in undergrowth and was beside a main road, so that is hardly a reliable temperature, and certainly wasn't breaking a valid reason to say records are being broken. So, you know, the media, of course, pick up on whatever the worst news is and, you know, take photographs of signs outside pharmacies showing the temperature, again, which is even further elevated. So there's a big exercise to be done in analysing this year's summer temperatures in North America, Europe and China to really see how much they have varied from previous records. It's been warmer back in the medieval warming period and in the Roman warming period, and before that in the Minoan warming. It's been warmer. I mean, just on there weren't temperature measurements, but there's evidence like grapes being grown in the north of England, and you know, Greenland was green. So we know that for sure. The Vikings went and lived there and grew barley, so that certainly was a warmer climate.
Climate does change. As we spoke about here at the Cliffs of Moher, you have evidence of continual changes from ice ages back to warmer periods. That goes on. Like 6,000 years ago in Ireland, it was 2 degrees warmer. None of these things are unprecedented. They're going on all the time. And they're cyclical then on a smaller scale. Over, say, the last number of years, we've warmed up somewhat. But that doesn't mean we're on a meteoric rise of global warming. It's just part of the cycles.
The climate is changing, yes. It is changing gradually, much less than IPC says, and certainly an awful lot less than what the scare stories in the newspapers say every day and every night.
We're living in an age of misinformation. We're living in an age of conspiracy. We're living in an age of exaggeration. And the reason those tools are used is that people they don't want to change. They want to protect vested interests. They don't want to recognise that problems exist. They don't want to live up to responsibilities that may follow those problems that do exist.
The problem is you won't get coverage in the media. You will probably get labelled as some sort of a right-wing extremist for having an opposite opinion.
It seems to be a daily hobby of all the national broadcasters that cows seem to be the most evil thing that ever was on this planet.
Emissions from the cattle industry include carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide from manure, cropland, fertilizers, and other production. But the one we all hear about is methane. When cows digest food, they create methane. Enteric methane, or the methane that cows burp and breathe out, is a shorter-lived greenhouse gas, but it can have a big effect on global warming.
There need to be balance and accuracy, as media are supposed to do. They are supposed to report in a balanced way and give a hearing to all sides of the arguments. And here in Ireland particularly, going back even to, there was a Citizens' Assembly on climate back in the year 2017, I think it was. Even then, there was not opportunity for independent views. It was just one side of the argument. And the policy and politics of all the government committees since then and up to now and going on have learnt just one side of the argument.
The farmers are in a very difficult position because most of them don't seem to be equipped to deal with the scientific arguments, simple as they might be. You'll see their eyes glazed over when these things are thrown at them, or you get a silent reaction. So it's difficult for them to deal with it, but intuitively, I haven't met one yet that believes it.
There are different groups of farmers. My experience is that younger farmers, because of farming training and stuff like that, are coming to a better understanding of the need for balance in agriculture and understanding the climate consequences a bit more. Older farmers, more traditional farmers, are less likely to listen, less likely to engage.
It's difficult for them to tackle into scientific arguments because they're constantly being bombarded that science tells us this and this is the science. There's no such thing. Science was always argumentative. So you would have discussions about things.
I think that situation that the farmers are seeing here, that through your experiences and interviews, that they are getting a little nervous of what the future is bringing to them. And I think they will begin to learn more about the science and about what the science is really saying and be able to make the arguments. And that's why the ICSF is here to tell them. We're not politically involved in the ICSF. Our motivation is to simply inform all sectors of society of what the science is really saying.
There is climate change. I don't deny there isn't climate change, because climate change from day one. We had different summers right through. But the one thing I do think that we haven't the research done, we haven't the science done on the benefits of actually having livestock. We haven't the science done of the sequestration, that we've only started some of it now on peaty type soils, but what we have done in Ireland is we have taken someone else's study or someone else's so-called science from somewhere in Europe, and then it's used everywhere.
I started looking at the figures, and after a while I realised, hold on a second, this doesn't add up. So that's what kind of got me interested in it. And then the more I followed up, the more I realised that it was very poor science. What was actually going on, it was that they'd take something with a grain of truth in it and expound on it to make an argument that didn't hold water at all.
Mm-hmm. Each of these cows in the round of the year, as I explained to you a while ago, produces 5 tonnes of CO2. She emits 5 tonnes of CO2 and she emits 0.1 tonne of methane. And all that CO2 and methane was taken from the atmosphere through the grass they consumed. So all that carbon is part of a natural cycle. And it's absolute rubbish to try and convince people that that natural cycle, which has gone on for 40 million years, has suddenly started causing global warming. And it's a bit of a fudge to say that for 40 million years they didn't cause global warming, but in or about the same time as we started burning fossil fuels, they suddenly developed the ability to cause global warming.
I find it quite upsetting to see what is happening in Ireland at the moment and what's been done to Irish farmers with the excuse that it's their cattle are causing the global warming. It doesn't make scientific sense, and it's extremely simple because it's all to do with the process of photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide is plant food. It's in the air, and during the growing season, plants take in the carbon dioxide and they make long chains of sugars with it. Cattle eat that and break it down and make fats and proteins out of it. But the carbon that is in their body has come from the plant. It came from the air. And eventually, they breathe out carbon dioxide, as we all do, if you think about it. We breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. Where did the carbon come from? It came from your food. Whatever you ate, whether it was sugars or meat, that's where it came from. The cattle are the same. So they're breathing out the carbon dioxide to the air. So you've created, essentially, this sort of a cyclical thing.
The carbon footprint I get from the government, from Board BIA, 70% of that is made up from methane from my livestock. Now, the methane from my livestock is part of a natural cycle. Methane from livestock and methane from mining are vastly different things. The methane from mining causes global warming. The methane from livestock is part of a natural cycle and does not cause global warming. So 70% of my carbon footprint is a lie.
The argument is extend then, oh well, it's really the methane. But when you think of methane, that's produced by the animals, especially the ruminants, when they're breaking down the tough structures that we can't eat because we can't eat grass. The animals, actually, those ruminants evolved with grass because grass grows from the bottom. It suits it to be clipped by these animals and eaten. And then they break it down and they give out some methane. But the methane is a solid amount in the air. It is not continually accumulating from the animals because it breaks down after 11 years. So as animals add it on one end, it breaks down on the other end and becomes carbon dioxide and water, which is exactly what it started as before it went into the plant. So it's just part of the cycle that goes on and on.
But you can feel how soft. There's some of this. That's what the bog is made from. That moss that grows on top. Cattle will incorporate that into the peat and to make room for this to grow again next year. So the cattle are actually helping build the bog, do you know? And that's where the carbon is sequestered from, you know. But they're also, it's really high on animal welfare. Do you know, like the fact that the animals are in here, it's enhancing the environment, it's really good for them. And it's actually building and sequestering carbon. The mainstream narrative is that ruminant animals are bad for the environment. But not this system, you know.
So it depends on how you do it, huh?
It's the how, not the cow. It really is. So if you look at their positives and negatives in nature, like how they enhance nature, and just mimic that. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
What I want to know is why is the EU and our Irish government using agriculture as a scapegoat for climate change? We're the most sustainable producers of food in the whole world. Our global emissions are 0.01% in comparison to China that are 30.9%. China continue to build their fossil fuel factories. Why do they want to put us out of business? What is the hidden agenda here? I think we should be the producers for Europe to provide Europe with sustainable food. Instead of putting us out of business, we should be the ones leading in this field. And we have the less global emissions when it comes to producing food, and we should be the ones providing this food for people of Europe and beyond.
Well, like, if you look at the agenda that's being pushed at the moment, in my opinion, they're trying to get rid of family farms. In all of Europe, not alone here, in nearly all of the world. If you look at, like, I would have looked at New Zealand, I would have looked at Australia, you'd look at different countries. And the only place that seems to be driving on is the Latin America countries.
There's a different agenda going on here. They want our land. And I think also you have things like deals being done, the Mercosur deal, which is cars are being sold to Brazil in trade for our beef industry.
I think that years ago there was other types of animals on the world before human beings, and they didn't seem to be as concerned about them. I don't know where this push is coming from, but I think the environmental lobby is gone stronger, and I think the ordinary people that were going about their day's work, rearing their families, farming their land. Farmers are quiet people. They don't be protesting for the sake of protesting. They don't have time to protest. And I think while they were working hard feeding the world, others were setting out an agenda to try and basically finish them off.
It's because of the call it the methane issue, and because Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions, the way they're currently calculated, about 1/3 of the national inventory of emissions is due to methane when it's translated incorrectly into a CO2 equivalent. So, you know, from a political perspective, wishing to show gains in greenhouse gas reduction, the farming sector and the methane reduction is one that they think they could achieve a quick action on.
This is probably the greatest land grab ever. When you look at the likes of the nature restoration law that Europe is trying to get through, it's struggling, but it's still on the go, the nature restoration law. When you look at the different rules and regulations coming in on the dairy industry, and when you look at the whole agenda that's being pushed at the moment, in Ireland we have strong property rights, but if you look at what's going on, it appears that they're trying to whittle them down constantly. In the name of what? We don't know, but it seems to be a mystery of an agenda being pushed at the moment.
There is an agenda I can see emerging of degrowth, and it's an agenda by, I would see the WEF, the Davos people, wishing to, you know, impose their rule on the world, and they see it as necessary in their view, and they think they're saving the planet, to go into degrowth and have better control, and of course the billionaires to become trillionaires.
Some of the stuff that they are going on with, let's be honest about it, it's not in the name of climate, because small farmers with suckler cows producing grass-fed beef aren't doing a lot wrong. Have a look at where is the biggest emitters in the world, where is, or what is the biggest emitter, like industry or whatever. And they are constantly, there seems to be an agenda being pushed on the agricultural sector, no matter what country you go to. If you look at New Zealand, if you look at Australia, if you look at all the countries in Europe, and especially here in Ireland, there seems to be this, I think, crazy idea that we're going to live in fresh air and that we can get rid of the livestock that produces meat. And if you're doing something good, if you're able to produce meat, basically from grass-fed, which we do here in Ireland, why would you take people out of production?
The inline and the whole thing is that we produce food. Everybody has to have food, no matter who or what you are. We actually hold the gold in our hand. We produce food. Yet we can't only make a living from what we're doing. But we hold the gold. You can have all the gold in the bank you like, but if you can't get food, it's no good to you. And we are the people that have food, but we are not being paid fairly for it, and we're not being treated fairly in all this climate thing as well.
Whether people like it or don't, they have to have 3 meals. And it's a farmer that supplies them. They mightn't recognise it or mightn't appreciate it, but it's a farmer that supplies those 3 meals to them in some part of the world every day they get up. So people should actually start respecting them and give them the credit for what they do.
You know, if we've no farmers in this country, we've no food, and that's wrong. And why are our government doing this? Why do they want to stop producing sustainable, good quality food? The question is why. It doesn't make sense to me, and this needs to stop. So I think it's wrong. I think, you know, the question might be, maybe is it time to leave Europe? There's too much dictatorship coming from Europe, too much red tape and too much regulation.
There's talk at the moment of 200,000 cows to be culled, that they'll bring out a scheme, a voluntary scheme. This word voluntary is being bandied around the place at the moment. But already, if you look at what the banding has done, for a lot of farmers it has taken the guts of 20% of their stock. And I would always contend that if you have a dairy animal that's producing 4,000 litres, if you have another one that's doing 5, or if you have another one that's doing 7, which one should you keep? The 7, because actually you have nearly 1 doing the work of 2. Okay, yeah, there'll be extra bit of meal, I don't deny that. But when you do the sums and do the maths and do the efficiency, and if you want to do the carbon, they're way more economical. And why they're trying to do this, in my opinion, is that they're trying to just cut the numbers. Whatever we can dream up in this country at the moment now, in a way that is sort of backdoor stuff of trying to say, oh, we're not doing that. If you listen to governments at the moment, they'll tell you, we're not culling. But in actual fact, it is a backdoor system to culling.
I would believe the people that are talking about this climate change really don't care about climate change. And the reason I'd say that is, if you want to be serious about climate change, who keeps the countryside and the environment in the condition it's in? It's the farmers of this country. It's they operate it, it's they look after it, they maintain it. And if you want to do something about this, what do? You come to farmers and you say, how can I help you? What can I do to enhance what you're doing here? We'd like to try and do A, B or C. Not coming to us and say, we want to stop you doing this and we want to stop you doing that, because they're not the people that know what's going on.
Farmers should educate themselves first on how that whole carbon cycle is working, because when they have that knowledge, they have some basis for making an argument against what is being pushed on them. I think they should take the management of wildlife away from the department and say to them, we are going to do this ourselves. It is our land, we know how to work it, that we can produce food for people and also nurture wildlife on it.
The reality is that at this stage in the discussion, we're at a very, very important juncture in it, because at this stage it's either stand up and fight time or lie down and be walked on time. And if farmers don't stand up and defend themselves, I think they deserve to be walked on, because they all know exactly what's happening. And it's time for Irish farmers to wake up and defend themselves.
If you were honest and genuine about it, that there's no way that the few cows in Ireland is going to solve the world if China is going to keep doing what it does. Because we're like 0.01 of 1% of the world emissions. Now, if we put a blanket over this country this minute, is that going to solve everything? No, it's not. But there's a fierce force at the moment of trying to get rid of, especially in the agricultural sector. It's a sad day for people that produce the best meat, the best dairy, the best lamb, in my opinion, in Europe, if not the world, but definitely in Europe, that they're nearly ashamed to say they're farmers with the beating they're getting at the moment. That's a sad day.
I think our options are, we've got to stand up and defend ourselves, because we are being unfairly blamed for something that we're not responsible for. We're able to produce this food. We're able to produce it at the least amount of emissions, probably anywhere in the world. But yet they want to stop us doing that and go to where it's way higher emissions to produce it and bring that in here. I think that is totally unacceptable, and it's totally wrong for us farmers to even accept it or even say that we are thinking in that direction.
The truth has to be at the bottom of every argument, I think. So if you build something on a foundation that isn't true, you're going to lose, or somebody is going to lose. Even society as a whole, if the arguments are incorrect, society as a whole is going to lose. Mm-hmm. So I think if farmers believe something to be true, you state that out.
And the time to defend themselves is when it comes to the next ballot box. Because any farmer that votes for Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Labour, the Greens or Sinn Féin deserves to be stitched up. They have to find candidates of their own and make sure people are in there to represent them, that are not out there to stitch them up and blame them for everything they can think of. The writing is on the wall.
Now is the time. Stand up or lie down.